Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Rachel Ramirez Guest, and I am a staff attorney with the State Energy and Environmental Impact Center at NYU School of Law. I'm going to be moderating our discussion today. We'd like to thank Southern University Law Center so much for co-hosting this event with us today. And of course, thank you to the State Impact Center for apologies there. I'm going to pause and pass over to Avery.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to take this time to say on behalf of Southern University Law Center and the Office of Career Services to say thank you. Thank you for taking this time out of your busy schedules to make this event a reality, to give our students a different thought of a different type of path to go down once they graduate from law school. Most don't think about environmental law until after the fact, so I think that this is a wonderful opportunity. And also I want to thank all of our students out there in Zoom land and here in the library for coming and taking time out of your busy days as well, because I know class and school and everything is it's getting down to the wire now, close to finals. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in this event as well. And I can't wait to learn a lot of things today too. Maybe I might go into environmental law, who knows? Thank you guys again.
All right, thank you, Avery. And so now I would like to introduce our fantastic panelists for today's event. We have Zora Genoa, Charmel Galden, Michelle Hall, Bo Jones, and Megan Terrell. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to share a brief biography for each of our panelists, but I really encourage you all to go visit the link in the chat that was just shared for review, and we can share that as well after for folks who are in person at SULC. All of our panelists have really fantastic and rich experience, and I encourage you to go read their full biographies. So just to give you a quick overview of the folks who are joining us today, Zora is an associate attorney in the fossil fuel program at Earth Justice, where their work centers on sustaining community partnerships to tackle fossil fuel infrastructure build out in the Gulf South. And Charmel is president and CEO for the Foundation for Louisiana. She has over 15 years of experience in philanthropic leadership, including nonprofit administration, program design, and strategic advocacy. And Charmel has practiced law both in state and federal courts. Michelle is an assistant attorney general in the Lands and Natural Resources section of the Louisiana Department of Justice. She is also a professor teaching animal law as an adjunct at Tulane and LSU, and I also teaches drafting environmental laws each summer at the International Legislative Drafting Institute. Bo is the general counsel and chief of staff at the Waters Institute of the Gulf, where he handles a range of general legal matters and is a member of the leadership team, merging the Institute's work in science, engineering, and resiliency with legal policy. Bo is also former environmental section chief for the Louisiana Department of Justice. And Megan is a partner with Plochet and Carr LLP, and Megan, I apologize, I should have confirmed that pronunciation, where she provides counsel on issues regarding environmental, natural resources, and coastal law, as well as administrative, governmental, and constitutional law. And Megan previously worked with the Louisiana Department of Justice as well, where she served as lead in-house counsel for the state of Louisiana during the Deepwater Horizon disaster and subsequent litigation there. So now, if we could please spotlight all the panelists, I will begin our discussion. All right. Hi, thank you again, all of you for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you here and to learn from your experience, and I'm sure that the students are as well. So this first question, I'm just going to ask to each of you, and I'll go around in the order that you happen to be on my screen. So first, for me is Zora, if you could please just describe a regular day's work in your present role. So that could be the substantive issues that you're working with, or the sort of the posture that you're working in, whether litigation or something else.
Hello, everybody. First, I just want to say thank you for having me. I really appreciate being in this space and getting to talk to y'all about the work that I do. So I'll start just by giving you an idea of like kind of the issues that I'm working on. I think that's a good foundation. So I work on mostly petrochemical facility fights. Petrochemicals are chemicals that are obtained from natural gas and from petroleum. And people use petrochemicals to make single-use plastics and lots of other things. And the processes to make them are often highly toxic and pollute our climate and our communities, as well as, so that's the idea of like essentially the issues that I'm focused on. And so usually the way that my job works is I'll work with communities who are concerned about a specific facility that is seeking to site near their community. And my job is to find a legal hook. Usually I'm challenging an air permit with LDEQ, or maybe using their a challenge to like a coastal use permit. These are permits that these facilities need to build and to operate. And so the goal is essentially to challenge them either through writing comments to state agencies. It can also look like maybe drafting like a Title VI complaint, depending on the context. So it really is a variety of legal strategies that we use, but usually I'm focused on specific facilities in specific communities, and those communities that we work with are generally communities that have organized themselves around these facilities, and we're just here to, you know, join with them in that fight and add the legal aspect of that fight. But we are not the only ones working against these facilities, and it really is a team effort that we engage in.
Thank you, Zora. And so Megan, you're next for me here. Could you describe a regular day's work in your present role?
Yeah, I would probably start by saying I don't have a regular day, right? It's one of the things I like the most about sort of this area of the law. Even today, I'm coming at you in a hotel room in DC. I'm at a Ecological Restoration Banking Association conference. So I do a little bit of everything. I have some litigation. I also do some transactional matters. So I have some clients that are in sort of the forest carbon space. So, you know, land purchases and the transactional sort of due diligence and title review that goes along with that. Also do environmental review, whether it's on the NEPA side or the state side for restoration or clients performing restoration projects and implementing projects. I do a little bit of work. We represent some governmental entities. So we're helping the state, for example, implement some of the climate action plan actions that came out of Louisiana's adoption of the climate action plan earlier this year. And those sort of, I do policy issues, legislative issues, and sort of change on a monthly basis in terms of where the primary focus is. But generally it's all in sort of environmental law, natural resources, coastal law, which is sort of a new branch of environment. You used to just sort of hear environmental, and then it expanded to environmental and natural resources. And we've sort of expanded that again and call coastal law, which kind of has its own unique aspects to it.
Thank you so much. And because we have likely have some first year students or students who aren't particularly familiar with these practice areas, I just want to define some terms in case folks want to look into them further. So first, Zora mentioned Title VI. I believe that's Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, if anyone wants to look into that. And Megan mentioned NEPA. So that's the National Environmental Policy Act. Is that, do we get it? Okay. And that's so that's a federal law as well, of course, if folks want to look into that. So next for me is Charmel. Could you please describe a regular day's work? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So like Megan, my days don't feel like they have a particular rhythm. Some days I get to talk to wonderful folks like you all and brainstorm how we're going to push back against forces in the state that are forcing migration. I work as a philanthropist. So I run the Foundation for Louisiana, we're what's called a philanthropic intermediary, which means we're raising money and re-granting money. What we're really proud of is our work in the EJ space, particularly around participatory grant making, which is the people who are doing the work decide on the strategies and how the money moves, which is incredibly important. And so I get to talk to funders, I get to talk to community partners, I help folks think about strategy. And every once in a while, I read a contract in my office and think, we're not signing that. So that's me in a day, lots of communication with folks. And I am the new CEO, so that's also something new for me. I get to be a lot more forward facing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sharmel. And EJ, for folks who aren't familiar, is environmental justice. And next up for me is Bo. Could you give us an overview of a regular day, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, pulling from Sharmel and Megan and Zora, the theme is that in this career space, right, which is wide ranging and covers a lot of opportunities, there's not a typical day. Which I think all of us, if polled, would probably say that's an asset of our job rather than a drawback. There's not a whole lot of paper pushers or number crunchers here, and I think that's a testament to how exciting this field is and the wide ranges that you can find career paths. I'll take a slight step back, and when Megan mentioned coastal law, right, and that's an area that I and Michelle have spent a lot of work in, and Megan, and I went to Louisiana State University for law school, and I can remember having conversations with administration, trying to build a coastal law program, because the folks who come through that school just wanted jobs, right? Everybody just wanted to be to find a job. And what was pretty clear then, what's pretty clear today, is that the intersection of the environment and climate and petrochemicals and communities and in environmental justice and social justice, all these things are an area that in many ways, unfortunately, but also fortunately, there's tremendous investment in this space, tremendous interest, tremendous opportunity. And so for a young law student or an old law student, or a young lawyer or old lawyer, there are tremendous opportunities here. So with me, my crazy non-normal day, my background is as an environmental litigator. I was trained by Megan and have worked with Megan and Michelle both. But I jumped out and started a coastal law practice at a private firm for a bit, and now I'm in-house at a nonprofit. I am one of 3 lawyers at our nonprofit. We have about 90 scientists, social scientists, geologists, ecologists, carbon scientists, artificial intelligence, machine learning. We have folks all over the map. And so I have an internal function, which is basically nonprofit management, right? Of making sure that we're in compliance with the IRS rules, making sure that we're managing our board relationships, making sure that like Sharmel said, making sure that there's not contracts that come across the desk and say, whoa, we can't sign those. But then there's also an external role from a legal standpoint of trying to figure out how our scientists and our policy experts, they engage typically with decision makers, whether that be a foundation like the Foundation for Louisiana, or a state like the state of Louisiana, or a community like South Plaquemines Parish or something like that. And they are trying to figure out how science can be informed decision making. And so I engage on the technical team to try and put an overlay of legal policy and kind of the regulatory overlay on that, and try and figure out how we can move the decision making process along. So I also have a role as a chief of staff. So my days sometime are talking to funders, some days are at public meetings, some days are doing Zooms like this. So it's all over the place. A lot of different wide-ranging conversations, and no day looks the same, which is fun.
Thanks so much, Bo. And finally, Michelle, could you walk us through what we've now definitely establishes not a typical day, but an overview of sort of your present role, please.
Yeah, so since Bo left, we used to have a separate environmental section and a lands and natural resources section, but they've now been combined into one. We have 7 lawyers and a human osteology or archaeology specialist on staff. So our section, we like to say that we do everything outside for the state of Louisiana, which is a little bit of an exaggeration, but also not. We work with pretty much every agency that is outside. In different capacities. So I represent Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and the Department of Natural Resources a lot. The 2 exceptions to that, I would say, is LDEQ mostly represents themselves because they have a large in-house legal department, and the Department of Transportation and Development. Those 2 agencies that are outside largely represent themselves. So we work with agencies, almost all of them have quite a few in-house counsel. So more of the everyday kinds of things they handle themselves. We get more involved when it's something a little bit more complicated, or when there's a statute that requires that the Attorney General get involved for whatever reason. So for example, one example of that is Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. I do a lot with them. They're probably the main agency that I really work with. And we have to be their attorney when they sue over damaged oyster seed beds. So I'm always their attorney on those cases. That's an example of a statutory requirement. We also work with a lot of the state boards around the state. So for example, I'm the general counsel for the Geoscience Licensing Board. We represent the Cemetery Board a lot. We represent the Funeral Directors Board. So these boards that are kind of, again, outside. And we also enforce the illegal sale and exchange of human remains and Native American burial goods through the state of Louisiana. And so that's why we have an on-staff archaeologist. We do a lot of work with those kinds of issues as well. And both Ryan Seidemann, the head of our section, and I used to be archaeologists. Well, he does a lot more still, but both used to be archaeologists. So we have some ability to do some of that work without needing to bring in outside people. So yeah, our typical day, we do a lot of consulting with the agencies, not necessarily just representing them. So a lot of times LDWF will call me, their in-house counsel, because they have something going on, and we'll, talk it out, work through some things and try to help them. And then other times we do a lot of litigation. We're in court a lot. And then, yeah, I go to the boards, we represent several boards. We go to those meetings, act as their in-house counsel, give them advice, help them solve problems.
Wonderful, thank you. I can imagine that in Sportsman's Paradise, doing working with every agency that's outside is quite a lot. So I want to pause there and I let folks who are joining remotely know that they can use the Q&A box to ask any questions for our panelists. We'll reserve some time towards the end. So please be sure to put your questions in as we're going along. And as we have now, I learned that there is no typical day in this practice area. It's also must be true that there is no typical path to this work. So I'm wondering if folks could just speak to what your career path was, what brought you to your present role, whether it be, what sort of experiences you sought in law school and your internships or in your job choices thus far. And I'm happy to just open it up to whomever wants to kick us off.
Happy to jump in first with nobody else speaking up. So I sort of knew in law school that I wanted to go the route of environmental law, even though I probably wasn't quite sure what that meant. So I was on the environmental law moot court team. I was at LSU. So that provided really valuable background. And then after law school, in that fun period between sitting for the bar and waiting to see if you pass the bar exam, I was actually working in the basement of the courthouse in Point Coupee Parish doing title work. Didn't like that at all, but needed a job, right? And it was good experience. And I got a call from my moot court coach who said, hey, I've got a buddy at the Attorney General's office. They're looking for sort of a new young attorney in their environmental section. Would you be interested? Like, please tell me where to show up and get me out of the basement of this courthouse. So I did. And that started my path at the Attorney General's office in the environmental section, which at that time was in the Public Protection Division and not in the Civil Division where it is now. Very sad to see the environmental section go, because I had grown that to create its own section and not be merged with natural resources. But understand that that happened. So I spent 12 years at the Attorney General's office. When I left, I was section chief of environmental and also the deputy director of the civil division. So that experience was just absolutely invaluable. I mean, just the breadth, as you've heard from all of us, of topics that we were able to cover, and sort of really understanding how things work on the governmental side, but also having lots of different clients was just, you know, if I had to do it all over again, I would still go into, you know, the public practice and representing the state and government, just because I think there's a lot to learn about the inner workings there. I left the Attorney General's office after 12 years and moved over to the governor's office. So I spent 4 years at the governor's office of coastal activities. And then that led me, I was actually Plochet and Carr, the firm I'm with now, did some work. I worked with them both when I was at the Attorney General's office working on Deepwater Horizon. They were sort of helping on the natural resource damage side, and did some other work when I was at the governor's office with them. And their offer was, you know, at one point came and said, if you're ever interested in leaving the state, we would sort of love to have you. My firm is headquartered out of Seattle. The founder of the firm is from Louisiana. They do a lot of work in Louisiana. So they said, we'd love for you to open a Louisiana office for us. So I did. I took them up on that offer and opened that office in 2020. And we are a small, almost boutique law firm. I think there are 6 attorneys at our firm, 5 of which are in Seattle, and I'm the one that's in Louisiana. So I find the small, right, spent 16 years in public practice, so I had to sort of learn the private practice, and found that the small law firm is a really good fit for me. That may not be true for everyone, but it is a really good fit for me. So that's how I went from law school to where I am now.
Wonderful.
I can go next, I guess. So as I said earlier, I was an archaeologist. I was an archaeologist for about 8 years off and on. And then I went to law school at Tulane, partly to get out of the cold where I'd been living before. And I actually did not want to go into environmental law. That's what I'd been doing as an archaeologist. I was doing environmental impact statements and cultural impact statements, and I wanted to change. But then I got on the Environmental Law Journal, and I made friends with an environmental law professor. And then I got hired by a firm that was doing environmental law, and I kept saying to myself, well, I'm just going to do this for a while, just because I have some knowledge about it, and instead stayed in it. So I worked at the firm, a small firm, for a while, and I enjoyed that, although my firm was not the healthiest, which you may find yourself in unhealthy firms as young attorneys. Many people do. Don't worry, just do your best, and you'll eventually be able to move if that ever happens to you, as it did to me. And then I got a job at the Environmental Law Clinic at Tulane, where I was for 9 years. And then actually my husband teaches at LSU. He got tenure, so I needed to find a job in Baton Rouge. And I had been on the other side of Ryan Seidemann here, who I work with, on a couple of cases, and had also worked with him on a couple of projects. And so when he learned that I was looking for a job in Baton Rouge, he made space for me here. And I was able to come work at the Attorney General's office with him. I really have enjoyed this. I think having different experiences like that, working in a private firm, working in a public interest position, and now working for the government, really is a great experience as an attorney. You can see these different perspectives and understand how things really work from all these different perspectives. And I think that gives you a much better ability to do a good job over the course of your career. So I do want to say, don't let yourself get pigeonholed too much as a young attorney. If you don't start where you want to end up, try different things and see how it goes, and learn from each of those experiences. I know we here often hire people who have externed with us. We have an externship program through Southern and through LSU. We usually take 2 students each semester and in the summer. And 2 of our attorneys went through that externship program at Southern. and now work here in our section in lands and natural resources. So that's a fairly common experience here for attorneys.
I'm happy to jump in if you're done. Okay, so at first I want to say, yes, every day is very different. I too am traveling for work and I will have to leave promptly at 2 to catch a shuttle so I can get back home. But as far as my path to coming here into the environmental law space, I really knew that I wanted to do public interest work and public interest law in particular. I started out working in like housing law and asylum law before I went to law school, working in legal aid organizations. And I think that's actually really important, is to, like, if you have the opportunity to clerk or volunteer in different spaces, like Michelle mentioned, you know, each firm is going to have a different feel, and it is important to figure out where exactly you fit in that space. So I knew I wanted to do public interest after those experiences. And while I was in law school, I had a really great professor. I became interested in environmental issues because in Louisiana, you can't really escape environmental issues. They're everywhere. Environmental justice issues and issues of, you know, like the actual environment, plants and animals. So coming into Louisiana, being here, I had a great professor, John Woods at Loyola, who started this class that was specifically about connecting students with environmental activists and allowing students to put their labor in service of the work that those activists are doing. And in beginning that class, she had this amazing dinner party before school even started during winter break. And she made all of us gumbo, and we all got together and, you know, really just shared and connected with each other. And at that party, I met Sharon Levine, who is the founder of Rise St. James, which is an amazing organization in St. James Parish, Louisiana, doing amazing work. And Sharon is now my client, actually, a community partner that I work with on a regular basis. And so I would really say that, like, gumbo got me into this. And Sharon Levine and John Woods and their passion for teaching and sharing this work.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I always knew I was going to be a public interest lawyer. I thought I was going to practice criminal law, that, you know, all my clinics, the federal court clinic, all of that revolved around criminal practice. I ended up going to clerk down in Albany, Georgia. So if anybody's not from Louisiana, that is the pronunciation. It's not Albany, it's Albany, and they're very serious about that, which is, has the Flint River. The Flint River runs right around Albany and often floods. So high awareness of what's happening. And in my clerking work, I realized, oh no, I don't actually want to practice criminal law, and decided, really based on what I was seeing happening in Mississippi post-Katrina, to come to Mississippi and run a fair housing center. And I'm going to really date myself, because this was the time when folks were sending emails with slideshows, PowerPoints, and the pictures attached, versus social media was not a thing. And folks just couldn't get the story out, what was happening there. I ran the Fair Housing Center for 6 years. One of the things that's really important about Mississippi, people are really close, they're very communal. And I had the opportunity to serve as a member of the STEPS Coalition. So I served on their board. And the STEPS Coalition organized itself around environmental justice, housing, economic justice, health, and human rights. And use multiple strategies to try and reshape federal programs and state programs in Mississippi post-Katrina. Some of those strategies were litigation strategies. And so my Fair Housing Center was one of the lead plaintiffs in the big housing litigation lawsuit in Mississippi, filed by the Mississippi Center for Justice. And some of those strategies involved organizing, protesting, artwork, generally stopping traffic, and bringing people's attention to what's been happening in Mississippi. So I did that for 6 years. And like a lot of folks who work in small nonprofits, I burned out. And so I took some time off. And I thought I would take time off and not do legal things, but I ended up falling into immigration law and naturalization. So that told me, okay, I'm never going to escape public interest. And I really value being able to take a complex issue and break it down in a way that someone who is not a lawyer can understand it. And I'm pretty good at it. And so for a while, I was a radio show host. So I hosted a radio show on WBOK, which is our local Black radio station. And of course, environmental justice issues are going to come up. Environmental, criminal justice, economic justice, and helping folks understand that environmental justice is not about saving a particular animal. So helping people to understand the racial connection to environmental justice was kind of showed up as a part of my sweet spot. And I did that for a couple of years and eventually found my way into philanthropy, which is a very interesting space. There are a lot of lawyers in philanthropy, and it's interesting because I had no idea that this was a career path when I was in law school. I didn't actually understand how people got into philanthropy, what philanthropy was, how much money is being distributed across the country, how much wealth we have, until I started running the Fair Housing Center and got introduced to philanthropists, right? So folks coming down to help support work on the coast. And it opened up an entirely new world for me. And I want to give a specific shout out to Gladys Washington, who is known as one of the godmothers of philanthropy down here. She just showed up with her long locks and told us what was going to happen and what we needed to do, and gave us enough room and support as a coalition to try and do really innovative work and save our spaces and homes and make sure we could be healthy at the same time. And so I have been in philanthropy for a little while. And I got reminded a few months ago that I said to someone 4 years ago that I wanted to be a CEO of a foundation. And I didn't remember. And so I'm telling you this story for two reasons. One, be ambitious, go for the big thing, and don't be afraid to do that, right? So, because I was playing down my own ambition, and someone reminded me not to do that. And you can have heads of foundations who look like you, which didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. And so we're in a particular moment of change in this country, and it will be interesting to see how philanthropic resources are going to be used to resist climate change and environmental degradation.
I'm happy to jump in briefly, Rachel. I don't know where we are on time on this question, but I would say in some ways my path, right? I think that was the question. We're on the path and how we got here. My path in a lot of ways, obviously, very similar to Megan's, right? I was on the environmental moot court board or environmental law moot court team, not the board. I wasn't smart enough for that. I just had a big mouth. And then BP oil spill happened. Environmental law professor said, "Hey, this guy's interested in it." Megan called, said, "I need somebody else. I need a team." And so I jumped in during the oil spill cases and went from there. I'll kind of take a step back on the question too, and say, because there were some questions in the Q&A box around, what's important, right? I mean, I, like Megan, I grew up in Louisiana, and whether it was in North Louisiana and fishing or down on the coast. And so I always was interested in environmental issues and conservation issues in Louisiana. And I didn't really want to be a lawyer. And I just kind of fell into it because I came out of, college in the 2008 financial crisis. I was like, I guess I'll go back to school. And so I dove into it, but wanted to focus on environmental law. But I got some good advice, and I wish I remember who gave it to me at the time, but they were like, "Look, I understand you want to be an environmental lawyer. I understand you have these kind of big things you want to change. Learn how to be a lawyer first, right? You've got a million different pathways that you go, as you can hear here, right? I mean, there's the philanthropy side, there's the foundation side, there's the litigation side, there's the policy side, there's the public interest side, there's all kinds of other ones. There's elected officials, right, that have expertise in here. But one of the things that I learned, and this advice was given to me, is that, look, when you come out and you say you're an attorney or you say you have a law degree, people have an expectation of what that means, right? And they're going to ask you about their will, and they're going to ask you about, this contract. And as much as you may be interested in, this one, and you can spend literally your entire career in one subsection of one federal regulation, right? I mean, in environmental, you can spend it so focused. But if you want to be an active and engaged member of your community, whether that be in the policy space, whether it be in the philanthropy space, whether it be in the litigation space, whether it be as an activist, whatever it is, and you call yourself a lawyer and you call yourself an attorney, there's going to be an expectation that you know how to practice law. And so I knew I wanted to be in environmental law, but made a point to go to the public defender's office, right, and sit in a courtroom and learn how to defend a murder case, right, and jumped in when I was at the Attorney General's office. I went and I jumped on to criminal cases and jumped into the courtroom as much as possible. I took pro bono work to help people write their wills, to do lawyers at the libraries to try and figure out how to be a lawyer. Because a lot of my day, today is not practicing environmental law, but it is all connected. And so, kind of ending with a comment to one of the questions. One of the questions was, what are some of the electives you would take? I think that everything that the four of us touch has a direct connection with administrative law, right? Administrative law, in some ways, is taught as constitutional law 3. Sometimes it's this weird elective where you learn about EEOC cases or whatever. Administrative law, it's the 4th branch of government, right? It is where so much of the rubber meets the road for environmental law, but also it is the bridge to everything else in public policy, right? Understanding the regulatory process, the orders, understanding the administrative law side of things and the regulatory piece, and how so much of governance happens outside of, how a bill becomes a law. And, understanding that it unlocks an understanding into, public policy, and unlocks understanding into philanthropy and into, litigation, right? And understanding that nuance. I mean, if you're trying to find a job and you can come out and show that you have an understanding of administrative law, I mean, the world is your oyster. There are so many areas that can open up for you. So I can't speak enough as to that. I don't know who teaches it. I know y'all have a quirky property law professor at Southern that we've talked a little bit about, Ryan Seidemann. I'm not sure who teaches admin law, but I couldn't double down on that a lot. But also, in the end, learn how to practice law. Take bankruptcy law, take these, and learn how to use the tools of the trade, and then find where that leads you. And hopefully, if you're as lucky as the four of us were, that those tools and that Swiss Army knife that you're going to get coming out of Southern Law School and other places, for those of you watching on Zoom, you're going to, you're going to take that Swiss Army knife, and hopefully it's going to align with something that you're passionate about. And I think we've all been lucky in that space. So.
Thank you all so much for sharing your really wonderful paths to your current roles. If anyone else wants to chime in and offer one class they wish they had taken, or one class they absolutely think every law student should take, just pause for a minute here.
Yeah, I would second the administrative law. I think that has been the single most helpful thing for me, and for anyone who comes into my organization. It's like the first thing I'm like, doing an administrative law primer for yourself, even if they're not going to do litigation or actually do legal work, even if they're just support, or even if they are support staff. And then I realized that I didn't make the connection. I actually clerked for the organization that I work for now. I was a summer law clerk for them in the summer of 2020, and for the same fossil fuels program. So I started as a clerk, then I applied for a fellowship. I was a fellow with them, and then applied for the associate program. And you can apply, I think they usually open up their applications in early fall. I know we just did an application process for this coming summer. And there's lots of remote positions, and it's a very large organization.
would say for, for most students, it's, you really worry about getting your first job. And so a lot of times you just have to take your first job. You may not get to pick what you want. I would say if you know you want to be in a certain area, then keep your fingers in that area in whatever way you can, doing some volunteer work, some pro bono work, going to the right CLEs, going to the right seminars. And eventually, if you keep your ear to the ground, opportunities open up. And if you don't know, just really, whenever you have an opportunity to do something that interests you, follow it a little bit, do as much as you can to keep engaged. Being a lawyer can be a really interesting, constant learning experience if you always just try to be engaged in the things that you enjoy.
Thank you. So I'm going to put one more question to the group. We have about 5 minutes before we want to turn over to questions from any of our students attending today. You've all noted the plethora of directions that folks can really take their career, but for our students watching and listening in who are trying to decide what internship they want to do right now, what pro bono opportunities they want to seek, I wonder if it would help them to know, maybe what you like, one thing you like least, or one thing you like most about your present practice setting. You all work in a really diverse set of practice settings.
So I'd say the one thing that I like most is that it really does feel like environmental law is always on the cutting edge. There's always something new to learn, which I sort of find really fascinating. I never really wanted to get, I think, Michelle, you mentioned it before, pigeonholed into sort of doing the same thing every day over and over and over again. And that is absolutely not the case here. I mean, there are always new laws to learn, new issues, policy issues, et cetera. So that's one of my favorite things about environmental law, is just the learning new things. My least favorite was Bo's mention of bankruptcy law, because you would really think environmental law, you wouldn't have to deal with that. And yet here I am admitted to like the district court of Georgia bankruptcy, which happened when I was at the Attorney General's office. Because there are, right, you do have environmental claims that get into bankruptcy court and you have to figure out a way to navigate it. So yet learning something new all over again. But I joke a little about that. There's not really a least favorite thing that I do. I really sort of enjoy and love all of the issues that I've been able to work on in my career.
Yeah, I'd say with Megan, bankruptcy and insurance are the oil of half the legal system. So no matter what you do, you need to know bankruptcy and insurance. It comes up in so many different ways. You don't need to be an expert in it. Just know where you need to go look stuff up and have someone you can call who can help you with it if you don't really know that stuff. But it's everywhere. I think the thing I like the most where I'm practicing, I was a scientist. I started in chemical engineering, and then when I was an archaeologist, I specialized more in the really scientific side of things. And so I love the science aspect of it, and I tend to really get into some of that parts of it. I have a real interest in animal law, so that's also partly why I'm really working with LDWF, and that's the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. So I really enjoy that as well. Working for government has its own problems. No matter where you're a lawyer, sometimes you have to represent people. It's part of your job to represent your client, whether you really agree with them or not. And I've had that experience everywhere I've worked, that I've had to represent positions I didn't necessarily agree with. But as a government lawyer, you have that level, and you also have a certain level of having to even be more careful about what you say outside of the office, being careful because people are watching you as a government employee. So that aspect of it, I don't know that I hate it so much, but it's just a little bit, it adds a level to it that sometimes I wish I could just ignore. And also, I think there's more politics here than I enjoy, except that there were politics at my last jobs too. There was politics everywhere I've worked in the entire history of my careers. So I don't know that that's special here, but I think those are the main things I enjoy and that I find difficult.
I think we can go 1 minute over if Sharmel or Bo, if you want to chime in with your favorite and least favorite aspects of your practice setting.
Zora, Sharma? Yeah, I'll chime in after.
Okay, quick. I love being able to organize resources and distribute them. Huge fun. The thing that I like the least is having to explain to people how folks who are most closely impacted by an issue are actually best positioned to impact the issue and not run afoul of lobbying restrictions, doing that part together.
Second that part about the lobbying restrictions. And then I will also add kind of part of that is just timekeeping. Timekeeping, y'all, so boring. And then there's lots of like administrative stuff. Like sometimes you'll have days that are like full of meetings that are not about your substantive work or about the like amazing issues and people that you're working with. And you're like, well, that kind of sucks. I would like to be working on the things I want to push forward. But you know, all those things keep an organization moving, keep groups moving, keeps teams connected. So like it's also part of the work. But the fun stuff I love about the work, working with community members, especially when it comes to like, I think that lawyers get stuck in our ways about like what is possible and what's not possible. And when you work with organizers, they're like, why don't you try this? And you're like, why don't I try that? Okay. And so like, I think it's that creativity that really pushes you forward. I really appreciate that and just that sense of community and caring for each other. But that also brings me to like remembering always that I am a lawyer and not an activist. And I've come from that background. And so I think that's also a hard line to toe and is a challenge in my work.
Yeah, I'll be quick, Rachel. My end, I think that I always envisioned, being a lawyer as working in some white shoe firm with some stuffy old man who talked like, Foghorn Leghorn, telling me what to do and how to bill my time. That's what I always pictured. I get to work with 90 amazingly brilliant scientists and, just people who have these amazing backgrounds from all over the world. And we work on issues that are super important to Louisiana and super important to the country and to other areas of the world. That's awesome. I'm an environmental litigator, right? I advocate. I stand in front of courtrooms and I pound the podium. As a representative of a scientific organization, we're non-advocacy. We're a 501c3, but we are a non-advocacy organization, right? So we put science in front of the decision making, but we don't advocate for a particular decision. And boy, that is hard for me. And it's really hard. Just like Zora said, it's hard to recognize that line between, advocate as a lawyer and activist. There's also this line of like, okay, I can see it, but we got to let the process work. And so that's the hardest part for me.
Thank you all so much. And thank you, Zora, for jumping in. I miscalculated who all had gone. Appreciate it. Keeping me on task here. And we do have quite a few questions, several that have already been answered. So I just want to acknowledge those that have been answered by our panelists already. Questions about what elective classes are helpful. Thank you, folks, for addressing that. And what, if any, in what ways, if any, President Biden's new executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad is incorporated into our line of work. So we have a question answer from Michelle on this one that they're let's see here.
I can chime in on that one too, Rachel.
Okay, great. Yeah,
that's okay. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, please.
So the President Biden's executive order, right? I mean, this is a time like no other, right? The federal government hasn't invested $1 billion in climate resilience in its history. We're looking at $37 billion coming from the IIJA and the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as influx to other projects. And then all of that through the overlay of the Justice 40 initiative, which says that 40% of those dollars have to go to underserved communities, disadvantaged communities under the Justice 40 initiative. And the area that our work has been focused on is we do a lot of work with the federal and state governments. We do a lot of work with the Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, and different they're looking at their existing grant programs and they're looking at their projects and saying, how do we push all of this money through our existing structures, but then also now have this new overlay of the Justice 40? And sometimes they don't really know how they're going to do it. And one of the things that we've not advocating for, but one of the things that we've been pushing is that there needs to be some of those resources that are set aside for the communities, right? So that the communities can stand themselves up. I can't, second enough what Charmel said, that the people who are most affected are the most well suited to help, get out of that situation or help design the solutions, and to try and structure some of those resources to bring directly to the community so that they can design what climate resilience looks like. There's a lot of different angles of that work from the federal government and those federal investments, but that's one of the areas that we've been really focused on, is to try and make sure that those federal resources are dedicated, to the communities, and that they have the necessary tools and methodologies and teams that are there, right? We go out and we do resilience strategies for Houston and for city of Jacksonville and Mobile and New Orleans and Baton Rouge, all these people who can pay us to, bring the best minds, the best, architecture firms, the best engineering firms, best lawyers to come in and figure out what resilience looks like for that community. But what about, what about Lafitte? What about Moss Point? What about these communities that are quite easily, arguably, more directly affected by climate injustice and climate change, but don't have the resources, and even if they are given the resources, don't necessarily have that list of projects to go and tackle. And so that's one of the areas that we've been really trying to figure out how to put some weight into and help isolate. So the long story short is that to answer the question, there's not a day that goes by that we're not talking about the executive orders out of President Biden's administration particularly on Justice 40 and on some of the infrastructure investments.
Thank you so much for that, Bo. And in the interest of time, there's one question on here that I think several people will be interested in, so I want to make sure that it gets addressed. Folks asked, how can we apply for the externships that were mentioned? And are there positions open for the spring? So I know Zora and Michelle, you both mentioned programs, and I see, Bo, that there are opportunities at your workplace as well. So if we could start with Zora, since I know that you have to leave shortly, that would be great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm happy to share. So I encourage you to go to the Earth Justice website and check out, we have like 15 offices and they cover so many different practice areas. And so like you will find an interest that aligns with something you are interested in, whether it is like healthy communities or oceans or oil and gas exports, like truly anything. So definitely check that out. I shared with Rachel the information for our recruiting manager, his email. So please reach out to him if you're interested. And yeah, like I said, we're currently in the interview process right now for springtime. I know that my office has filled its position. That's the fossil fuels team, but I know that other offices are still like either interviewing or accepting applicants. So definitely check that out. And I'm trying to think where else. I feel like all schools have your boards, but also think about the professors who you're connected with and also who have practice areas that are really interesting to you, and ask them if they have any ideas for you. You never know, like really where those connections will lead you.
Thank you, Zora. And I dropped those emails that you mentioned in the chat for everyone who's joining us remotely, and we can share as well after.
One other thing I want to, there's externships, but also you can, what I didn't mention, pro bono opportunities. When we've been approached by students who want pro bono hours, we come up with a project and we can take them separately outside of the externship programs, and that can be a really good opportunity. So if there's someplace you're interested in doing your pro bono hours with, you can do that as well.
Yeah, for us, the Water Institute typically works with Louisiana Sea Grant, which is based at LSU, but Louisiana Sea Grant is a statewide component. And we do a joint. I want to make sure that we can pay our summer externs enough so that and so we have historically joined with Louisiana Sea Grant to where we can offer a little bit more time and a little bit more money for those clerks. We'll announce that at Avery. Maybe I could chat with you offline and kind of get our stuff out there. But my deputy director is a Southern Law grad, and we will be launching an externship program early in the spring, and then it'll be open for the fall. Typically 1 or 2 positions. But I'd also say I'm not going to speak for everybody else, but just if there's an interest or a particular area or something that we've talked about today, you have our contact information, email us directly, because, you know, my legal team is very small and our extern team is very small, but between the four of us, we know a lot of folks in this space. And I know for one, I'd be more than happy to pass out resumes, to make phone calls, things like that. That's how a lot of us got into our space. So it'd be rude not to do the same.
Yeah, and I'll talk about just one other pro bono opportunity if anyone is interested in it. It's Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization, lpdd.org is the website. I actually did pro bono work for them, and what they're doing is there's a 1,000-page book that talks about all the different pathways and laws that are needed to sort of implement climate change and climate resilience and decarbonization. And they're taking volunteers, you know, law students, lawyers across the board to help draft some of these model laws to implement the actions in the plan. So I actually drafted one of those model laws, and I'm sure there's still plenty on the list available if anyone is interested in that.
There's also, Marina had mentioned vaguely in her question about how she and I met at a conference last summer. The Energy and Natural Resources Law Foundation, the Energy and Mineral Law Foundation, and the ABA Environmental Law section all have opportunities for students. So the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Foundation will pay for students to come to their annual conference, and you can meet people from all over the world, all over the country. EMLF, the Energy and Mineral Law Foundation, does the same. And the ABA lets students volunteer, and then you can go for free to the section meetings. So I would reach out to some of those kinds of organizations and see what they have available while you're still a student. And you'll meet a ton of people there that you can establish lifelong relationships with.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we just have a couple of minutes left. So I know I really want to thank all of our panelists for joining today. This has been, at least for me, an incredibly valuable, as a young attorney, an incredibly valuable experience learning from all of you. And I'm sure our students have learned a lot today. And based on all the wonderful questions we've had coming in, I know folks likely have more questions for you all. So I'll just note to the student attendees, all of our panelists have very graciously agreed to share their email address, that along with their longer biographical statements that we'll share with everyone for folks attending in person at SULC. Don't worry, we'll make sure that gets to you. We'll work with Avery. So thank you so much again, panelists, for joining us. And it was really a pleasure learning from you all.